Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the ATARC Cloud and Coffee discussion. My name is Chris Oglesby with MorphWorks and co-host with Bill Hunt of SBA. We're excited about our show and our guest. Before the introduction, let me take a few minutes here. ATARC is with the Cloud and Coffees with the ATARC Cloud and Infrastructure Working Group, bringing a platform with a goal of bringing lessons learned and ideas to the ATARC community. Our focus will be a conversation about our guests' experiences, past and present, executing modernization and transformation efforts. Just a little housekeeping for the audience. Please make sure everybody is on mute and feel free to enter questions in the chat. Again, we're looking for questions that are focused on the lessons learned and things that you're trying to solve in your own organization. So moving to introductions, Mike Cassidy. The Chief Technology Officer of the U.S. Trustees Program in the Department of Justice. Mike brings a great perspective. He and I've had the opportunity to share a stage before on lessons learned in the ATARC community. He's been on both the private and public sector side of things, helping transform and modernize. And a special treat, if you hang on till the end, Mike will share his secret ingredients to his health shake. So. As we start all of this morning, I've got, as I mentioned the last time, we've got an espresso machine now, and I'm going through all kinds of different capsules. So this is the barista blended capsule of Bianca coffee, I think it was. So it's a lighter blend. Bill, what you got this morning?
Well, last night was a long night, so unfortunately I had to go with the black tea again this morning to get me up and running. Yeah, we had all of those fast and furious executive orders coming in that I was having to watch in real time. So it was a big night. Mike, tell us about that delicious bright
ingredients. But
I'm going to give the recipe at the end, but it got some beets, got some fruit in there: pineapple, mango, coconut. I've got some spinach in there, some almonds today. Sometimes I mix it up with cashews and walnuts, a little risky there. And sometimes, if I want a little more sugar, I put a little honey in it and mix it up in my Vitamix and have that pretty much in the morning, noon, and for dinner. Make a big enough shake.
For those of you that haven't seen Mike in person, that makes him look like Speedy Gonzales. So he's or the Roadrunner, whichever one. Which it's there is a pace that Mike keeps that most of us are envy about. So
we're going to try and slow it down for everybody today. I know between the three of us, we tend to fill the space pretty extensively with thought leadership, though.
Yeah. So let me. It actually, kind of lends itself to a good segue, I think, into what Mike, what you always talk about is any type of modernization or transformation effort really is, in your view, based in foundations, right? So the foundation approach to these things is key. And so just kind of kick off the call with your view on kind of what the key foundation approaches are.
Thanks a lot, Chris and Bill and Kirsten, Nicole. I think a couple things foundationally I think are critical with any cloud migration or once you get into cloud operations and cloud efficiency. I think one, you have to have the right staff that's willing to learn, willing to adopt, to change, and be ready to take on that journey. A lot of times, and I've talked with a lot of agencies kind of one-on-one and things, and some of the common themes I've seen, and some of them I've talked to years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, and then I've talked to them recently or caught up with them through LinkedIn or email and things like that, what they're doing. And some of the challenges, they didn't get, the old saying from the GE book, the right people in the bus to execute their strategy. So I think having a good team that's capable of learning and adopting quickly, because when you get to the cloud, things accelerate compared to the old data center days, is one foundational brick that you have to have. And I've been blessed with the folks I've worked with, not just at USTP, but other agencies and other companies with very good team members. And that's been a big part of the success on getting to the cloud. The other thing is training. A lot of times people don't anticipate, and then I think myself, looking back in our cloud journey over the last several years, the training up front, the ways of doing things change. You're going a more automation route, a more scripted route possibly than than the manual route to, buy a hardware server. 5 months it comes in and you rack and stack, and the days of rack and stacking are over. You can provision the server in seconds. You can do it manually and do it 20 different ways when you have 20 different people do it, or you can have automated processes, which is a lot different than a traditional data center. So ensuring you have the training up front and the right people, I think, are two foundational items that I think all agencies should be looking at. And not just agencies, the vendors too. I've seen a lot of vendors come in and not understand the cloud, what they're selling sometimes, or they get in there and are saying this person knows the cloud, and you quickly realize, hey, they don't know as much as you thought they did. So you see some challenges there too. So having the federal employees and the vendor community, again, properly trained and willing to adopt and learn, I think, are two key foundational things. Chris and Bill.
So taking that a little bit further, I mean, we're talking about lack of training and lack of skills across the agency. I mean, obviously, this is a topic that, Chris and I beat the drum of pretty regularly here. It's something that we try to address, in the federal cloud computing strategy, the new Cloud Smart, document, trying to dig at that. But clearly, we still have a ways to go. And obviously, we're always going to have a ways to go. It's not like IT modernization is a point in time where you raise your flag and say, we're done, we're good. So, I mean, given that, what direction are you really pushing towards? I mean, what are the areas that you feel like the federal government still needs help, where we're still weak in, as far as critical skills to be equipped for the future, not just today, but where we're going?
And focusing on cloud, Bill, correct? I'm not going to look at AI or other things, but focus on cloud. I think when you get into cloud, machine learning, AI come part and parcel with it. I think having automation skills, infrastructure as code, able to script and understand how to script server builds and or services, and really get out of the ways of clicking buttons in a cloud console or sitting there writing things up. Your code is kind of your documentation that you're checking in and out of repositories. Hopefully you're signing that code and able to do that. I think that's a skill that the federal community struggles with and doesn't have enough people that are doing that automation and infrastructure as a code to get to the cloud. The other skill or the other challenge, I think, and I think this is with industry too, frankly, is the rate of change. As we talked about with my health shake, I like the workout analogy. So the data center was maybe 6 miles an hour on a treadmill, nice light jog. It's 10 miles an hour. It's a 6-minute mile on the cloud. And a lot of people aren't ready. They don't maybe have the aerobic capacity to keep up with that. So I think the continual learning has to happen. And that's not just a skill, but that's hard work that you have to do. On a regular basis, I probably read in the morning and throughout the day, probably 10 to 12 articles a day on technology. I get some trusted sources, email to me each day on security, cloud, AI, different topics of interest. And I try to read 12 to 15 a day. On the weekend and off hours, I'm doing that reading and also doing training. I think that's a critical thing that people have to do to keep up with cloud. I think that's a big struggle because it's a struggle for me to understand it. And I know I read a lot and I try to read very fast. So I know other people, and I've talked with other people, are having that struggle too, keeping up with the amount of change coming.
So in that, how does an organization, again, you can use your fitness analogies, but I'm definitely not at that pace on a treadmill or outside. So unless somebody's chasing me, that might be a different story. But in that situation, one of the keys, that I see, and let's use the triathlon as an example, continue on the fitness story, is, you got the swim, bike, run, right? You've got to have proficiency in each, right? And the ability to kind of move through those. Now, as a big guy, it's a special division, which they call the Clydesdale. So, right? and so I'm definitely more proficient as a biker than I am a runner, and better at swimming, et cetera. And so, I think organizations need to think about that, right? I mean, because obviously organizations have shrunk with technology, but how do you, as an organization, not just have a single point of that, that readiness, understanding? Because I agree that, the pace is insane right now at which technology changing. Before it was the hardware, right? The pace at the hardware was changing so fast that your software, now it's because of where the hardware is, you're able to do more with, with the application environment.
I think there's a couple things that agencies can do. We regularly do brown bag lunch sessions once a month where somebody, different areas, talks on a different topic, whether it be cloud or cybersecurity or machine learning or whatever that topic is that month. I think getting virtual training, access to virtual training for your IT team is key. There's a lot of good vendors out there. Definitely evaluate each one. I would do a trial for multiple ones to see which one fits you. Depending on, again, what infrastructure as a service cloud provider you're using, you may want to look at that one cloud training provider that specializes in that one. Having virtual training, brown bag lunch sessions, and then formal training classes for where you need to really deep dive and focus. I think that three-pronged approach helps. What I also try to do, and I encourage, and a lot of folks in our team do this, is you read articles that are interesting, you post it out there. You share that information in your collaboration space, whatever that may be, so other people can see, hey, this is something interesting in cybersecurity, or this is something interesting in cloud billing optimization I didn't think about with spot instances or reserved instances. So you try to share that information and grow that sharing culture, that modern IT culture that's agile, that's sharing information and continually learning. Those are the key things. And I think those three things, getting a virtual training academy, some type of training partner, doing the brown bags, and the hands-on training. Depends how large you are. Now with COVID, a lot of the on-site training now has become virtual, so it's a lot more flexible. And I'm hoping as we move forward, it will continue. So now you can train people in different parts of the country and larger classes at bigger scale. But I think you have to be looking at that every year. What are our weaknesses? Like you said, Chris, you're a biker, but maybe not a runner because Clydesdale maybe better on the bike than on the run. So, but how do I? What do I need to do? Maybe a virtual academy brown bag's not enough for you to get up to snuff on running. Maybe you need to have that deep dive 5-day class to help you learn about databases in the cloud and things like that. But I think having those three things and having the fourth thing, kind of a sharing culture where you're sharing articles and information and things like that, really helps.
I'm really glad you brought up specifically the hands-on training aspect. This has been the drum that I've been beating for a while, as I think everybody knows. Like, there's a big gap between sitting in a virtual seminar and having information put on a screen and actually doing it. That hands-on bit. And I think a lot of some of the reskilling efforts have really suffered from, that sort of a mentality that you get your certificate and now you're a professional in whatever technology thing that we're talking about. So, I think really having that opportunity to use it back in the agency as well, not just learning it helps.
Bill, I'm glad you brought that up. It's part of the virtual training. You've got to make sure, and I'm glad you brought this up, there's a hands-on component, because I'll take the running analogy we use, Chris here, as our Clydesdale. I can train him. I actually have a lot of running books behind me. Matter of fact, I'll even do an example, Chris, for even I didn't plan this, but Run Fast was one of the books I used to read when I used to train for marathons. You can read that book, but you got to go out there and do it.
Right.
And the same thing with cloud. You've got to have hands-on training. These virtual academies have to show you whether it's IaaS, SaaS, or PaaS platform, and you're using it. In addition to that, there's some a lot of times with the vendors, you can get a practice or trial license for $150, $250 allocated a month. You need to look at doing that for your team and dividing that up and make sure they can play in a safe area, not production or let's try this script out and all of a sudden you're down in the VMs or something in production. So having that hands-on in the cloud. I think years ago with some of the older technologies, you could read a book and get that certification because things were much slower. Remember, operating systems would be supported for 10 years. Now they're supported for 30 months. It's just one example over the last couple years. And the cloud, it seems like it's supported for like 90 days before it's updated. So hands-on is definitely a critical part of that virtual training academy or whatever service you're going to choose in virtual training. You have to have that for a majority of IT members and all the members, right? They might not need to learn Kubernetes or things like that, but they might want to understand how to back up and how to monitor and fail over and monitor, a VM. For example, remember a server you used to buy, Dell or HP or Compaq, if you go back that far, bought servers, hardware. You bought the server, you racked it, you put the cabling in and power, you were fine. Well, a server in the cloud is maybe a resource group. It's a NIC, it's a hard drive. There's backup components. There's geo-replication. There's all these different components that you didn't even have to think about in the data center. And so that's why the hands-on is key. And it's hard to just read about it. You have to really do it.
Yeah, so we got 3 questions actually on the training.
Oh, yeah.
Jonathan, I'm not going to run through the full discussion here, but ultimately, Mike, you can take a glance at it.
Yep, I'm looking at them.
Kind of focused on, really that planning to train, right? So you and I have talked about this in the past, that it really is at the pace. You do have to have you can't just have an expert in everything, right? And I think this kind of goes to that sense of, okay, if at the higher level there isn't really a training plan, but I'm doing this on my own, what's a good way to kind of get an organization to move towards the training and ultimately.
I see Jonathan.
Yeah, Jonathan's
name right. Jonathan Muir's question. One thing: executive buy-in. Do you have executive buy-in? We regularly, when we were doing our cloud migration, we regularly met with all the key stakeholders and our CIO and briefed our senior leadership on a quarterly basis of what was going on during that migration process. So having that buy-in there and maybe making part of that, for the federal employees or PWP, that, hey, you're going to get trained in this particular technology. Not necessarily having to get a full certification and do all that, but you're going to get trained in the following cloud technologies. So having executive buy-in and having it in a person's PWP, or whatever, if you're a private company in your goals for the year and be incentivized for it, are 2 things I would look at. But if you don't have executive sponsorship, you are going to be frustrated. Then you have to reevaluate, is this organization, like I said earlier, foundationally ready, a learning culture ready to adopt, agile enough for the cloud? They may not be ready. You might have to take it real slow and maybe just do backups in the cloud or something very simple and start very small before you get to the next level.
Yeah, I think, one of the things we talk about a lot on this program is that planning, right? So we talked, Mike built it from the foundation standpoint, but that planning and being able, I would suggest, if they're not at the leadership level, being able to present something that articulates that if this is where we're moving, this is where we need to go, right? With the resource, and if you want, ATARC actually has a couple of working groups that are being combined around kind of the reskilling and the focus around things like this, that with the hope to help organizations. But I think, the planning and the strategy is key on that. So.
Kendi Toto had a good question. Can it be expanded to non-IT audiences? I will say this, that is one of the biggest challenges I've seen, not just where I'm at now, but in multiple other places. And I was a consultant for a company, so I saw a lot of different organizations. Training for non-IT, you have to translate to their language, right? You're not going to talk technical terms and get real, in running interval splits and fartlek technique and things like that and running. You got to keep it real basic, reading and run straight ahead around the track for a mile. I would say brown bags and briefings with them on the technology, trying to get them to go to maybe send them a webinar, a seminar to review, sending them simple 5 to 10 page summary papers on technology. Like, for example, there's a lot of different vendors out there. ATARC is one of them that write summaries on cloud technologies at a summary level. I linked to a NIST document that's really good, and the references that Kirsten's going to be sending out. But summarizing that up for them, maybe boiling it down to a PowerPoint slide deck and giving them more references to work on that. One-on-one conversations with key executives and stakeholders that have a lot of sway will help you sit down, explain, answer their questions one-on-one. We've done we use a collaboration platform, and we've done some office hours where people can come ask questions and then IT. You could do that for non-executives, non-IT staff and things like that. So I think it's not one approach, it's a multi-pronged approach. I think PowerPoints, keeping it simple, keeping it short, and maybe some one-on-ones would help, would help you address that question. Now, another question, Alex had a good one, the free tier. I do agree with you. The free tier is very, very minimal. There are, depending on what vendor you are, there's 3 or 4 main vendors out there. There are licenses you can buy with different things for each vendor that go beyond the free tier, and you get a credit of $200 or $300 a month, and you might have to look at that. The other thing you might have to do is you might have to set up a separate subscription, call it a lab or test bed subscription that's tied in. You cap it at this much billing. You have it, real locked down. So you tell people, hey, this is your test area, and this is how much you're willing to commit a month, and let people train and learn it. Because I do agree with you, Alex, that the free tier is not. It's going to help you personally to get some stuff done, but if you want to do more complex scenarios and integrate, PaaS, SaaS, and set up some VMs and a Kubernetes cluster and do some logging and do some security analytics on a SIEM in the cloud, you're going to need more than the free tier. So that's where you get into a lab or test subscription with your agency to see how much you're willing to spend on that a month.
And if I can just foot stomp that and take it a little bit further, I mean, just from my previous seat, at the table, I think that it's a pretty clear differentiator in successful organizations that can modernize and those that can't, based on the amount of money you're spending per head on training. If you're not willing, especially around your IT staff, you should be expecting to spend 2 to 3 times as much on training for those staff as normal staff, because there's so much more out there that they need to be aware of. And
more change. Remember, we talked about the change. Unlike run fast book's 20 years old, it probably applies to the day. It's not very static. It's constantly changing. The other thing I would recommend, work with your vendors. A lot of times there's free training they offer, ATARC conferences, things like that, but work closely with your vendor to make sure you're taking advantages of the vendor offerings they have, whether it be the large conference they have once a year. If you're in a large IaaS provider, you should be going to, Azure Ignite, the Google one, and the AWS event. You should be going to those each year and seeing what's going on and the changes that are coming. That is critical in a CTO role or a higher role to see what is the strategy for that IaaS vendor for the upcoming year, so you know what's going on. And other strategic partners, your SaaS and PaaS platforms, somebody, maybe it's not the CTO, but somebody needs to go there and make sure they're attending so you can keep track of that stuff, because that's where a lot of announcements are made.
Let me see if I can weave together.
For those on the call, there's some links that Mike highly recommends in the chat that might help with some of the things that we're talking about today, especially if you're looking to help your organization. You've heard, for those that have tuned in previously, you hear us talk a lot about CloudSmart and kind of the reference to CloudSmart and the guidelines there, as well as the different ATARC working groups. But I think Mike has other aspects of what he's recommending, and one of which I kind of want to tie into. Okay, so you have the strategy, you build your foundations. What do you see as the best way to really execute on these, right? Because again, at the pace at which things are changing, at the pace at which you try and keep up with, let's not call it training, just understanding and knowing, right? I mean, just basic knowledge is hard. How can an organization really kind of look at what framework, would you recommend to an organization?
What we've used successfully, it was actually in place before I even got there. For technology like cloud and the infrastructure side, Agile Kanban, we use, kind of 4 or 5 swim lanes, on deck, in progress, we have blocker, and we use those swim lanes to manage the technology, and we review them every week with the entire team to make sure we're trending in the right direction on these key things. For a cloud migration, it's major. If you're going from data center to cloud, we had a special meeting to review those tasks involved there to ensure we had executive sponsorship, cyber, that services, operations. All the key groups were in that meeting to go over, and it was dedicated every week during our migration to make sure we could address any issues that arose. And there were a number that did arise during that time. But if it's a big project like moving to cloud and you're just starting off, you want to have that dedicated meeting maybe outside your normal weekly review of a Kanban board or Scrum or whatever methodology, Lean, whatever methodology you're using. I think with technology infrastructure, there's so many dependencies on shared service providers, on vendors, on procurement, on just personnel, that it's different than writing code where you can get user stories and things like that. You can do user stories and on the cloud migration, but there's a lot of variables outside of your control. That's why I think Kanban's better than a 2-week or 1 week or 3-week sprint, where you might have user stories and points, but all of a sudden now the network provider didn't install a key upgrade to the cloud connectivity point. Now all of a sudden your user story and your points are blown for that sprint. That's why I recommend, from what I've seen over the last couple of years, using a Kanban method.
Just taking that up to the next level above it too. I mean, obviously, huge fan of using the agile approach. We definitely use Kanban as much as we can over here as well, and have seen great success with agile. Obviously, the federal government has been pushed towards that. But when we're talking about actually getting into the weeds on, is the juice worth the squeeze, to bring it back to the smoothie metaphor? How do you actually go and you look at the products and see all of these things that are rolling out and make the determination that this is going to be a good fit? And most importantly for me, the sustainability. Having looked at everybody's portfolios, I saw a lot of people move aggressively to cloud under cloud first, years ago.
Right.
It was so aggressive that some agencies have had to do cloud consolidation now instead of just data center consolidation. You got a lot of different pieces moving. So how do you make sure that the products and the decisions you're making are appropriate to, your agency?
I think, Yogi Bear, hindsight's 50-50. I think what happens, you made the right decision potentially at that time, but the cloud changes so much that 3 years from now, that decision may change. I think, one, you absolutely have to do a bake-off and use multiple services. Don't just say, hey, I want to go, I want this cybersecurity solution to scan Kubernetes. I'm only going to go with this vendor. No, you should be looking at multiple vendors. Look at your requirements. A lot of times with supply chain, FedRAMP, that narrows your requirements down to the federal government a little easier than it is in the commercial space. And then bring 2 or 3 of those in and really see it in your environment. With the cloud, it's easy you can turn up and set up things within hours to test it and let it run for a week or two and see what's going on. Is it meeting your requirements? Do you have, whether it be a user story or some high level requirements, you can give each vendor the same requirements and then see what it can do for you. And then look obviously at the costs and things like that. But testing it out and doing a bake-off is much easier. In the old days, if I wanted to bake off on a sand, I'm ordering $1 million sand and have 3 sands in that, you're not gonna be able to do that. Now with the cloud, it's much easier to test the smoothie out to see if you like it versus having to buy $1 million smoothie maker to make it. So I did want to answer one question. Assad had a question: what is your advice for system integrator contractors that are modernizing in the cloud for the government? That's a great question, Assad. I think several things. I think making sure the culture. I like the book Project Phoenix. For those of you familiar with that, I think that's a must read for everybody in IT, from your help desk up to your other staff. I think that's a very good read, and everyone should be reading that in there to get in that mindset. I think obviously the brown bag sessions. I think each system integrators is tough, right? You could go to one vendor, or I'll do the running analogy, Chris. I'll use that. You go somebody who's running 10 miles an hour, but you could go another that's running 4 miles an hour. So what tactics you learned in Project Phoenix and being more agile and changing might not work at the 4 mile an hour pace. They might be data center centric and might not be ready for that. That might be overwhelming for them, frustrated. So I think having the ability to learn different disciplines, say, hey, in the federal government, you might see, from earned value management to full requirements and larger projects, and you might see DevOps and very fast, cloud operations and infrastructure as a code at the leading edge ones. You're trying to train folks in the system integrator world on the different things you can see, and then you look at where are they strong in and try to get them to a client that's going to be like that. Because a lot of times what the client is based on the statement of work and things like that, what they're looking for. you can tell, are they running 10 miles an hour or are they running 5 or 6 miles an hour, a little slower, more conservative? And it's all over the map. I've talked with a lot of agencies. It really depends on the staff. Like I said, how good is the staff? How well are they trained? Are they risk averse? Have they had problems in the past, cybersecurity incidents, or other things to make them a little more conservative? There are some legitimate reasons why you want to be conservative in some government agencies because of the work they do or things that have happened in the past.
Yeah, and just to kind of foot stomp that a little bit here, like, and I've definitely seen it agencies where you get out ahead of yourselves. You have a contractor come in, do a whiz bang solution, and the second that contract ends, there's nobody there that knows how to run the thing. So you can leave yourself in a bit of a hole if you don't have the knowledge and skills, as mentioned earlier, to like keep up with the stuff that you're putting out there. You can't just outsource all of it. You do have to build that capacity.
That's key. You have to have somebody in-house to know that. Chris, you had something, Chris?
Well, no, I was just going to say there's a question here from Chrissy. I'm not going to ask it specifically, but kind of it ties into, the three of us have had conversations and they've always been around, again, kind of there's no real silver bullet technology, right? But again, to the picking a path, picking of the foundations, developing your strategy. It's tied here, Chrissy, to the governance framework policies and ultimately to automation and data retention. We've talked a lot about data. We obviously, it's a big part of what we do as a company, and I know you two are both adamant about the use of data. We were having, again, back to the fitness, we were just talking about the amount of data that we're able to look at about ourselves. I mean, for me, it may not be necessarily as good as Mike's, but it's data that you can make decisions from. But that's a stage thing, right? I mean, it's not something that you immediately start your transformation, your modernization, whether with a contractor or without, and kind of move to this phase. So, working your way through these pieces of evolution, right? Again, there isn't a silver bullet technology, but there are things that, and I'm not asking you technology, but there are things that you can do in kind of the steps of your framework and your modernization journey. But it takes a while to get to that data side, right?
It does, but I do want to answer Chrissy's question. We do have governance in place for cloud, and in other places I've had, governance is key. Naming conventions, what you're going to do, what type of VMs you want, your strategy on when you add a new cloud services. What's that strategy? Is it a CR? Is it a technical review board? Is it emailing the CIO say, hey, I'm going to add this today? What level are you at? A lot of that depends on the size of your agency and things like that. Large agencies going to have maybe a technical review board, a DoD or somebody much larger would have a little more serious. But we do have cloud governance, and we put that in very early, and that's been key to kind of handle the change as we go through it. So we do have guardrails and guidelines. Now, what I would recommend is not to get into a 200-page governance document. That's where you're going to, on your IS platform or SaaS or whatever, that's where you're going to lose people. It's going to be too complex. Nobody's going to read it and fully understand it, and nobody's going to be graded against it. You're going to have all these rules out there and give it to an auditor or compliance person, but then it's like saying, hey, I'm going to run every day at 5 a.m. That's what you're saying in your governance doc, but you only run once and it's at noon for a mile. So I think you have to be careful with governance. I think it's a balance. Size of organization you have, maturity level you have, but you definitely should have cloud governance up front. And we also do, monthly review of the bill and a quarterly review of just sit back and let's go deep dive in a work group session to look at everything to make sure, are we automating things here? Are we cleaning up right? Could we be doing things better? Kind of the old Malcolm Baldrige type thing, TQM, but a process improvement thing every 3 months, but a monthly cloud cost review. And we do have governance, and it's pretty solid. Where we need to get a little more mature on is some of our other cloud providers that have got SaaS, where it's a little tougher. SaaS and PaaS is you don't have as much control, right? Things in SaaS are kind of released very, very quickly, and sometimes you know about it, sometimes it just surprises you. Where IaaS, you have a little more control, and you're kind of running the show. So the governance in a SaaS provider is going to differ. You're going to focus more on what Christy kind of talked about, data retention, and we are addressing that. We do have to enhance that, but that's one area we're working on, a data retention and records management piece.
Just digging in on that a little bit further too. I mean, for our agency, there was, the big cost component of the data retention aspects, right? All of these things have the implications,
Yes.
Obviously everybody in the federal government is subject to, the NARA, the National Archive requirements around like what gets archived with regard to email and those sorts of communications and other files, personal data, et cetera. And all of this for me kind of ties back to cloud optimization, right? It's about figuring out, what you need for the size and shape of the problem you're solving. Can you talk a little bit about like your experience and, working through the optimization process when you're doing these monthly budget review meetings, for instance, like, what are the things that you're flagging? What are you really looking for? Talk about the process a little bit.
What we've done, we did our own custom because it provides a lot more analytics. A lot of cloud providers, I would say, provide you I'll do an analogy, provide you a basic running plan. You're going to run 3 days a week. We needed more metrics, right? We needed heart rate, temperature, the whole nine, right? Watts, VO2 max. We needed, I actually did a health study about a year ago at George Mason. So we got into that type of analytics you really needed. So we did our own custom data visualization. So I know how many cents I spent on network, egress, ingress. I know it down to that level. And I would highly recommend you understand it first there. And some of the cloud decision maker tools provide you bigger picture things, which need to be seen at the executive level. But at the lower technical level, I think it's good to at least start off with. And depending upon your size, it may not be scalable for some of the larger agencies that have millions of dollars of cloud bill a month. But to really look at taking the data and getting a data visualization tool so you can really see what's going on and organize it. That's where metadata, tagging, grouping, all that has to be organized. You have to think about that up front. Again, that gets back to Chrissy's questions with governance. So you have that governance and you have a naming structure and metadata structure so you can organize and slice and dice the data and really see it. So we can go down low and then see the spikes between months. Okay, why did storage spike up 25%? Or why did the security services spike up a lot? Did we increase the logs? What logs do we increase? So we can really ask and answer a lot of questions in that monthly meeting with the cost changes. But I would recommend definitely look. You can pull a lot of that. APIs are down there. You can pull a lot of that information in, and I would go beyond the Excel, charts. I would look at a data visualization tool of your choice, preferably one you're already using in your agency, to visualize that data and really see it. It took a little while to get it tuned, but we got that right now, and it's been pretty. It's been very well. We've identified a lot of issues, whether somebody didn't get a reserved instance or a hybrid license or didn't name it right or things like that. You can really flag that really quickly. I think that now I see another question. Skahi Prakash asks, how do you recommend balance funding decisions of modernizing today with cost savings avoidance not being realized for years out? That's a very good question. I think one of the challenges most agencies have, is that they don't have a real good understanding of cost of the data center. Data center costs maybe go out to different groups. IT might not see it all. IT doesn't see the electricity maybe, or the security guard cost, or other costs that are not IT based, maybe procurement or finance, or somebody else is managing that and paying for that. So a lot of times you think how much a server costs. I ordered the Compact at Best Buy and bought it for $5,000. That server, that's the cost. No, there's electricity, there's other costs to that data center that aren't factored into that. I think you have to try to get that big picture of what you're spending existing on your data center and come up with a number. It may not be exact. It's not going to be exact science. We're not looking down to the penny. And then look out, if we went to the cloud and didn't upgrade our SAN, for example, and our data center, how much would we save over years when you're starting that migration? I think that's important. We did that. And I think Tom Santucci is the one. I know he shared that with some of the agencies that have asked for it. We did a detailed paper on this several years ago, which I need to update. I think once you get into the cloud, though, then you're looking, now it gets tougher because now you don't have the data center to really compare to. That cost avoidance 3 or 4 years out. You've been in the cloud now. Now you've got to look at, are you managing it properly? Could you be doing a little more? Could you shut down some VMs? Could you move from VMs to a container or something else to get rid of it? Can you consolidate better? Can you take that service you run on a VM and make it a SaaS? You get into more advanced, complex decisions to hopefully shrink the server footprint, move up the stack, lower your maintenance and management, and focus more on managing the PaaS and SaaS service.
But you do have to have that journey kind of mapped out, right? I mean,
Yes.
I don't think you don't dive right in, right? You've got to be able to articulate. And again, we talk about this a lot on here and then offline is that knowing and understanding of what you have. I think to just kind of finish up one part of that, if you don't know what you have, it's tough to, acquisition is tough anyway, right? And if you don't know what you have, it's really tough to acquire, to be able to articulate that there is a period. I mean, one of the things that we did last year with ATARC working groups is kind of this cost modeling. And, Mike and Bob Duffy and I were working through kind of just a framework of things that you need to be thinking about as you step through it, right? The modernization path is not, hey, we're going to the cloud and there's an easy button. You're talking from a very mature standpoint, where others, I mean, it might be like Bill's talked about, just trying to get people to use Adobe Sign, right? And so
well, and I think I think for his answer, there's people either beginning the journey or just starting.
Right.
You hopefully compare the data center, your existing hardware cost, and what I've seen, maybe somebody's seen different. When you look at hardware and the maintenance and all that and compare it to cloud cost, it generally is cheaper over a 3 or 5 year period or anything you're going to do. Again, depending. If you have a lot of data or there's other elements, somebody told me 7 petabytes was a magic number. One person that did some math on it. I don't know what the magic number is, so you have to look at that. I'm making a blanket statement here, but I do want to caveat it that you have a lot of data or other certain requirements that the cloud may not be, you may want to keep it on site. Not everything is cloud only. Not everything should go in the cloud. And some people have sensitive workloads or other requirements where it may have to stay on that mainframe or on that SAN because it's going to be cheaper and easier and you need more control. And you already have a good backup system and data replication. Some data centers are very mature and the costs are very well known. And it may not make sense to move to the cloud for them with certain applications and things like that. So it's another, that's another point. I don't want to make a blanket statement there. I think the next level, once you get into the cloud, it's really looking at, do you add competition? Do you go off the stack? Do you bring in different vendors? Do you get rid of that VM and move it to container? I know we have a container question we'll get to in a second. So those are the decision points there. But without having a data visualization and those analytics, you're not going to be able to make the decision points. I would argue the cloud makes things so much clearer in how much you're paying. A lot of times with SaaS, it's prices per user, per device, and IaaS, it's a whole different pricing model depending on what you're buying. But you can see what you're spending a lot more clearer than you did in traditional data center days.
I mean, if I can just jump on that though, I will say that that should not be a reason not to do the total cost of ownership when you're doing the side-by-side comparison, because I think that there are some magic numbers in there, like the 9 petabytes that you mentioned, because if you're moving data in the cloud, you're paying for it 5 times, right? You're paying for storage, any compute you're doing, backup, ingress, and egress. Yep. Versus if you just put it in your data center where you're only paying for it once or twice if you're, depending on your backup situation. So that is a comparison. But also, I mean, all of your ancillary costs have to be taken into account. Site reliability engineers are way more expensive than your data center practitioners at the end of the day. And if you're not doing the apples to apples comparison, some agencies might get themselves in over the head. And to that point, the one thing I will mention is in lean years, agencies cannot upgrade our hardware, right? We can just leave the data center as it is and we can save a few bucks that way. Cloud doesn't allow that. You have to pay the bill that you have every month. And sometimes you can turn off some VMs or only run them for 8 hours a day, much to the consternation of your users and customers. But, that's a different equation. And you do need to think about, your 5-year outlay of am I suddenly going to expect that we're going to have more fiduciary responsibilities around saving 10% or 20% off my IT bill, and what are the implications of that, and doing that sort of.
Well, but they also, Bill, COVID, we're all remote telework. A lot of things, external factors change, legislative things change, things like that. So you might go in the cloud, your cloud strategy, which we get we have cloud strategy and cloud roadmap. We update it every year and adjust it. Now that we've been fully in the cloud for a little while, it's critical. It's more fine tuning and we handle in the governance in our regular meetings. But things can change quickly. The thing about the cloud, you can quickly add or test things out. It was a lot harder to do before the cloud when you had to physically buy stuff and get that hardware and test it out. So it is a little easier. I did want to answer Thomas Santucci, your good friend there. GSA DCOI plug. I gotta make the plug there. I'm on the executive committee, so I want to make sure people are attending that meeting also. But Tom asked, can you talk about the benefits and challenges with the department level shared services? So that's a great question, Tom. So I think there's a number of things when you're a large department. Some of the independent agencies, I've heard as many, there's 512 out there, and the CFO Act agencies, I think there's 23, 24. A number of agencies have shared services, right? Network, maybe cybersecurity, mobile services, all different types of things are provided. I think the number one thing you have to do is build relationships with the shared service provider, attend the meetings, and regularly test out and help and contribute so you know what's going on and understand the shared service end to end. I think that is probably the number one piece of advice. If you're going to be successful, if you're a subcomponent like I am in other agencies, in a larger agency that has shared services, understanding what shared services you have in a service catalog. We have all this documented and clearly outlined, and we regularly work on that. And making sure you're working with that shared service provider. You know that person's name, you work with them, you're a regular contributor, not just somebody who's complaining and saying, hey, it's down. Well, here's some ideas to make it better. Let me help test with you. You gotta have a partnership with the shared service provider to make sure it's just not all gimme, because you want to help them succeed, which also helps you succeed. The second thing I would say, Tom, is you've got to have metrics. You've got to have monitoring to understand if the shared service is having problems so you can point this out. A lot of times, the shared service provider may be looking at the bigger picture, but not the lower level details with the cloud connectivity, especially when you get into network connectivity. That was a big challenge, and I think still a big challenge there. I know we got TIC 3.0 and Sean's done a great job with that. And as we move to that, I think it's going to improve, but there's always going to be involvement in changes. But I think a lot of agencies still you've got to make sure you have metrics to monitor end to end from that server or end user computer to the cloud. You need to be able to see the endpoints and be able to see where the latency is and the bottleneck and understand that map, understand those touch points there is, I think, the second critical thing with shared services, because I think most agencies, the shared services common throughout is the network and TIC, and fully understand that TIC stack, understanding where the problems can be and working with the team, attending the meetings regularly, reading their updates and what they want to change, and being part of that as a pilot or helping out and contribute, I think are the key elements to success with shared services in a large agency.
And that actually, I don't want to skip the containerization, but Eric, and I've been on many calls with Eric for ATARC calls, and they're always good discussions and kind of obvious ones. But Eric kind of talks through here along the thoughts of a foundational approach. The best way to save money is not to spend it in the first place, right? But kind of to the lift and shift. I love this analogy. There's the lift and shift mentality of just move it and move it into the cloud. But again, going back to if you don't know what you have, that can be very, very costly, right? And so this question of, do you really need to migrate everything? Can things be merged or eliminated as you migrate? I think that's a big question for everybody to undertake, and it's one that CloudSmart covers. So those of you who haven't read it, take a look.
And just to add to what you said, Chris and Eric, I think assessing the inventory or your data center is key, because a lot of old folders, maybe old data that not part of records management, that can be purged. Maybe there's some old servers that can be consolidated. So you definitely, I do the old grandma's attic, analogy. You don't want to just move grandma's attic to your attic. You want to clean up grandma's attic, get rid of those old 78, 13 records that you may not need, or you don't have a record player to play them, and make sure it's consolidated before you move it. Otherwise, you will be paying a lot of money. There's also tools you can use and IaaS providers give you to analyze your environment. You should be benchmarking your environment for several weeks, if not a month or two, to see what are the projected costs of moving all this stuff before and after cleanup, to see if you've gotten savings and what you should be focusing on. A lot of these IaaS providers have programs to help you quickly get to the cloud. You should be looking at that, again, taking advantage of that, right? You're attending the conferences, you're looking at the blogs of these IaaS vendors you're using to make sure you know what's going on and you can take advantage of these things. The other thing I would say, and one of the things we did, start small. Maybe it's a backup. Maybe it's moving the VM that manages printers, where if it went down, you know, printers still print, right? Look at low hanging fruit to get people up to snuff and understand what is involved in backing up the cloud, securing it, logging it, and all that. Don't start with your case management that's critical, that it has to be up 24/7 and move that. That's not the right answer. The right answer is maybe get some backups in the cloud. Maybe you still have your tape backups you're doing there. You're getting used to the issues. You're running through the network issues. All of a sudden, backup doesn't work because SSL inspection breaks, and now you've got to get an SSL inspection exception. Those are the type of things will help you smoke out things, and you build gradually. But you don't just say, I'm going to take my most critical, my file servers, and just throw them in the cloud first. You've got to start small. You've got to do the analysis. You have to work with the vendor. This already assumes you have a strategy roadmap. You've done the bake-off. ABC cloud vendor has won, and now you're working with them closely with their expertise. You've gotten training, and we talked about the training. You've done some classes. You've got a virtual academy. You understand it, because if you're going in there to buy a car and you have no idea what a car does, you're going to get sold a 98 Yugo or 88 Yugo and have problems.
And I think that the big thing, and we talked a lot about this on our last show, was what we at MorphWorks call the emotional side of change, but understanding that user, right? The mission user. To your point, Mike, you go after some of those low hanging, it may not impact the user, right? The mission side of the program, but it starts to show success that you can then get them on board when you get into their environments, right? So, Eric, I think that's kind of two sides of it, right? That before you go retire something, you want to make sure that you're communicating and understanding and knowing what you know, the users and the mission environment needs, because there's going to be that, you know, that need that hang on to the technology.
I do want to go back. Anonymous attendee had a question about, I often hear the use of containers would drive down my cost down, although I understand the consolidation aspect of containers or servers or oversized VMs. However, what other economic advantages containers exist? So, you know, containers are one of those things you have to look at. Some of the old legacy apps, some of the things you might move to the cloud, maybe the security scanning software, some other software, printer management software, can't be containerized, right? Maybe you can't do that. Maybe you look at doing, you know, a Windows core, for example, you know, or moving it to Linux to have a smaller footprint. Doesn't necessarily have to go to containers to save money, but if you have a smaller OS footprint, guess what? You don't need that, you know, high-end class of VM machine that has, you know, a lot of memory and a lot of storage. You can go a lot lower. So like everything doesn't have to go to the cloud, everything doesn't have to go to container. I think where the containers help are in DevOps, kind of pets versus cattle thing. You've got a lot of, you know, cattle type servers or services that can be quickly thrown away, easily isolated, and are really meant for containers. A lot of things, a lot of legacy things that we still use aren't really ready for containers when you get into infrastructure and the back end operations of things. But for the DevOps and your development side, you should be looking at containers and try to lead with that, because you're going to save money in that smaller footprint of device. Plus, you have to keep them up to date. There's a lot less patching overhead and things like that. Where I think it's a challenge is the security market still maturing there to monitor containers. So you want to make sure you've got the right appropriate security in place and you have the right logging. I know there's so much things to talk about cloud. We could have an hour discussion about logging. But I would say another key element that everybody should be logging, not just the right things, but a number of things, and really have alerts keying off those logs. Well, as we know with the recent events, and I did the DHS, CISA had a real good paper on security guidance for the recent SolarWinds activities. And that really goes in. Are you looking at the right things in your logs? It's great to collect terabytes of logs a day, but if you're not alerting off things and understanding those logs, you're going to have a problem.
I mean, just kind of tying those two threads together, I will say, like, you don't have to go and jump in head first and do everything if you're going to like look at containerization and these other like technologies. Like, if you're a small to medium sized agency, it might make sense to go and do infrastructure as code, Kubernetes, everything end to end on day one. To your point,
Right.
Mike, you got to get there incrementally. You have to have the staff to support it. And also from, very similarly from a security standpoint, if you're logging everything, your storage costs are going to be exploding on you very, very quickly. So you got to make sure you're using the stuff and you're pragmatically like culling what you're keeping, and you have to find that balance. Again, it all comes down to what level of maturity is your agency at, and what level of sophistication can you actually get to, and how much money have you actually been given by Congress to be able to do it.
But I think it gets back to what we said, the foundational. If you don't have the culture and the training, and you only have one or two people that know DevOps, containers probably aren't going to save you money. They're going to cost you more money. Nobody understands it. They're not going to be right logging. Could have a security incident. So again, if you're running 4 miles an hour on a treadmill, it's not time to go to containers. You need to do the basic blocking and tackling, backups, low-level VMs, and real simple stuff. Get your cloud governance order, your cloud optimization, your cost model, and things like that. There's a real good question by William.
Before you get into that question, we got about 4 or 5 minutes left. I do want to give a quick plug for our next show. Will be February 4th. We're going to have John Ramsey, the CISO for the Student Clearinghouse. Appreciate everybody's time. We've got tons of questions in here. Really appreciate all those. And I think as probably most people expected, between Mike, Bill, and I, there would be no dead time. So, all right, go ahead, Mike. I know there's.
I'll hit that last question so we can wrap it up, and then my health shake smoothie recipe that everybody's waiting for. Can you touch on some of the foundational security methodologies you migrate workloads to cloud? We see these often considered late. I agree with you, William. I do think they're often considered late. I think it gets back to the teamwork. You have to have security. They're a key stakeholder. They're involved early. You're addressing that. There's a NIST document that I put out there on the ATO process that was written, I think, about a year ago. It's in one of the links that I sent out. I would definitely read that because it goes over the ATO compliance process and how to help that in the cloud. Having the security team part of your discussions early on, thinking about encryption, what type of logging are you going to do? What type of agents? Are you going to use the traditional agents you might have had on your traditional data center servers, your hardware-based, or maybe your VMware-based, or are you going to look at the cloud-based security tools? Or are you going to do a combination of both because you're in a hybrid mode? Most people that are migrating probably have to look at the legacy tools, but also should be looking at some of the cloud provider tools to see what they also see so you can have that unified view. I think that's key. Networking security, I mean, you got to get into lateral movement, zero trust, working on that. Bastion host approach where you're not having everybody just log on to the cloud from whatever laptop, having a singular source to log on and having those rules locked down to where they can get to. Maybe doing a tiering infrastructure, maybe have a tier for your key critical servers, and then another tier for your application servers, and another tier for your lower end user and workstation type of servers, or some of that. There's a lot of discussion about zero trust and privileged account management out there with a lot of different tools and solutions. So those are things you want to look at early. And again, the right logging, having the right logging, and then alerting those logging, having an automated alert go to your help desk system to say, hey, you need to look at this. This is an alert event, 5268, I think, SolarWinds event has shown up. You need to look at that. So not just having the logs, but having alerts. Now, one thing about the cloud, a lot of them have AI and machine learning, and some of them, once they get to know your environment, will make recommendations for you. Looking at them and having the right resources, that's a challenge too, because you can get overwhelmed from that. So ramping up your logging slowly, looking at purpose, what you're looking for, and having specific things in those logs are going to be key in keeping the security team integrated early on. Hopefully that answers your question, William.
Great.
I think we're at 9:59.
We're at 9:59. I don't know if you want to share the actual recipe for your shake.
I gave that to Kirsten, I thought she was going to put that out there, right?
She can paste it in the chat. Talk us through it real quick, Mike, in the 30 seconds we have left.
Real quick, Vitamix, I've got 3 cups of water, 1 cup of spinach, 1.5 cup of frozen fruit. I like the Hawaiian fruit I did today. Sometimes I go berry medley. Wyman's fruit, 3-pound bags. Excellent. I got the link in there. Red beets. You can do golden beets. I prefer red. I also use nuts, about 1/2 cup of nuts, almonds, pecans, cashew, or you can mix them all together and 3 cups of water. Blend it up, man. If you want to add honey, coconut flakes, for a little extra sugar rush, you can do that.
That's why Mike has a 4-minute mile pace. So just in case everybody wants to know.
4:59 was my best, but not anymore. Not anymore.
All right.
All right.
Thank you guys. Nicole, do you want to come on camera real quick? And I'm going to take a screenshot. So everyone smile in 3, 2, 1. Thank you guys.
Thank you, Kirsten. Thank you, Nicole. Mr. Cassidy, always a pleasure. Mr. Hunt, just another day in the neighborhood.
Thanks, everybody.
See everybody February 4th.
See you next time.
Thanks a lot for all the questions. Appreciate it.